Welcome to the Rational Egoist. Well, Kamala Harris is running for president, and a lot of people seem to have forgotten who and what she is. Today's guest recently wrote a piece for Reason where she reminded everybody exactly who and what Kamala is. Today's guest is a senior editor at Reason, author of Reason's bi-weekly newsletter, Sex and Tech, and co-founder of the group Feminists for Liberty, Elizabeth Nolan Brown. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me on.
So Kamala's awfulness, as far as I can tell, can be broken down into three categories, which of course overlap. She's a horrible candidate, she has horrible policies, and she has poor character. So in what ways, in your view, is she a bad candidate?
I think she's a bad candidate because she has just proven herself to sort of let all the momentum around her fizzle time and again. When she ran for president in 2020, she started off with a lot of fanfare around her, a lot of big donors, a lot of big supporters. She was considered a top tier candidate. And then she was, pretty much so bad at campaigning that by the time she exited the race a few months later, she was polling at 3%. She was polling below just about every other candidate who had been, even remotely considered, a viable candidate. So she's just sort of, and she also, had a hard time when she was running for Attorney General of California. She just hasn't been a good campaigner whatsoever. And there's really no indication, I don't think, that's going to be different this time. It's a little bit hidden right now because Democrats are just so excited not to have Biden as their nominee anymore that they've all just been like, yes, Kamala, and sort of like rallying around her. But I mean, notably, that's mostly been the base, and that's mostly been with her really doing very much. I think that as she gets more visible and as gets more exposure amongst the non-base of the Democratic Party, then we're going to see probably some of the same gaps we've seen previously from her.
One of the issues you point out is that she doesn't seem to have a core, that she just moderates her positions based on the audience to whom she's speaking. And of course, moderates her views is just a fancy word that I've used for flip-flopping, right? What are some examples of when she's flip-flopped and how she's flip-flopped?
So this goes all the way back to her time as district attorney in San Francisco. San Francisco is a pretty progressive city, so she had to sort of run as a progressive prosecutor. But there actually already was a progressive prosecutor DA in place when she was running, so she ran to the right of him, and she tried to like kind of toe this line of like, I'm going to be progressive, but not as progressive as him. And so she made a lot of promises while she was running, like, I'm not going to uphold this three strikes rule, which says anytime you've done three felonies, even if the last one is not, the same offense as the other ones or whatever, you're going to be put away for a long time to life. Things like that. I'm going to support the drug courts, which say if you're arrested for simple possession of marijuana, you can go through this alternative to incarceration program, things like that. Once she got in office, she went back on a lot of these campaign promises. She sort of was like, well, actually, the drug courts, they're letting people go. They're letting people go that should be punished. And so we're going to like roll those back. Actually, I'm going to support the three strikes law when it's for gun crimes, because I don't want people to be, and this is just owning a gun. When the third crime was, someone owning a gun. Well, okay, that's too much. Like, I don't want to let like people who own guns and illegally like go, so she just sort of even though she was fine with other crimes being eligible for this three strikes thing. So she's really sort of, back then walked back a lot of these progressive prosecutor positions. And then we've seen this, again and again throughout her career, including most recently during the 2020 presidential run, when, she would say that she was for Medicare for all, and then she wasn't for Medicare for all. And then she would sort of hem and haw and say, she wasn't quite sure if she was for it or not. She would criticize. There was one memorable moment where she criticized Joe Biden for supporting federal busing schemes for students, and then it came out that opposing federal busing schemes for students, and then it later came out that she had also opposed them. So she'd been like hitting him on this as if that was a horrible thing to do, and then it was like, well, wait, you're on record as having also opposed them. So there's just been so many examples like that where she sort of says what she feels like is right in the moment for that particular audience, what they want to hear, and then changes that when she's talking to a different audience or when slightly different political winds have sort of blown in.
You mentioned, and I've heard a lot about how she treats her staff. What specifically did she do that could be judged as mistreating them?
I don't have any specifics on this front. And if there have been some, I don't recall them. I just know that there has been a long-standing, reports of poor treatment of her staff. I mean, when she was running for president, there were, I think, good articles in Politico, articles in the New York Times. There were a lot of different pieces about how morale was so low amongst her staff because it was a very like high pressure. You couldn't make any mistakes. You would be berated sort of atmosphere. That she sort of, that she hired her sister, brought her sister on to be a part of the campaign, and was sort of, taking advice from her, and in a way that people felt was sort of weird and not professional, and that it just wasn't a place where people felt like they could be comfortable and feel like they could speak up without being sort of harassed, I guess, for if they said the wrong thing. And that's sort of been a recurring theme from that you hear, but it's all been it's all been anonymous, but they've verified these are staffers. They just haven't wanted to use their names for understandable reasons and things like that.
They don't want retaliation. Yeah.
Yeah, they want to work in Democratic politics again, I assume. So
Yeah. Now, she's been in the public for a long time. She was a district attorney, she was attorney general, and there's a portrayal of her as somebody that was pretty tough on crime. Is that accurate in your view? And what are some examples of this?
I think it really depends. And part of this is, you hear, I mean, yes, she was sort of tough on crime. Sometimes I think she was tough on crime in ways that libertarians definitely don't support, like I said, she sort of said, I'm going to support these alternatives to incarceration for drug crimes. And then she ended up, walking that back. She ended up being more tough on drug possession and petty drug crimes than her predecessor as a DA did. When she was in the DA's office, she ended up, stepping up enforcement and arrests of like misdemeanor, what they call quality of life crimes. So that could be things like graffiti or panhandling or loitering or things like that. She cracked down on prostitution arrests, and under her watch, they raided a bunch of massage parlors where prostitution was allegedly taking place. So just a lot of these things that is sort of, drug use, prostitution behind closed doors, these sort of things that are consenting, activities between consensual adults, or ways that adults are using their body that, is not hurting anyone else. And she really cracked down on those. And I think that that's, one of the reasons why libertarians and civil libertarians more broadly have not been a fan of hers, because, it's not just she took cracked down on crimes. She wanted to solve murders and robberies. She
Yeah.
cracked down these sort of crimes that many of us think should be decriminalized, or at least, not be the harsh penalties that they are. But she also cracked down on crimes that, broadly people I think can agree are not really things we want to crack down on, or she acted in ways that are tough on crime that most people wouldn't support. Like, for instance, she, went to bat for a dirty prosecutor in San Francisco who was caught sort of like botching crime lab things and stuff, and she defended him. She went after the parents of truant children, people whose children missed school too much, and instituted a new program where they were going to crack down and put the parents of truant children in jail and arrest them. And she did this in San Francisco, and then she did this as attorney general in the whole state of California. And she even wrote in her book that one of the reasons she wanted to become attorney general was so she could take this truancy plan statewide after doing it in San Francisco. And it's just like, what kind of person's motivation is, I really want to crack down on the parents of children who are absent from school? I mean, even if you think that it just seems like there are so many reasons why children could be absent from school. And even if you think, there should be some penalty for that, cracking down on those children's parents and putting them in jail is not going to help those kids. Their kids are not going to be
No.
in more school when their parents have a criminal record, or in jail at the time. So it's stuff like that I think is sort of makes her, saying she's tough on crime maybe portrays something good in a lot of people's minds, but the way she was tough on crime is not a way that was very good.
It seems there's a large element of hypocrisy here, because when it comes to abortion, she says that people have a right to do with their own bodies that which they want, but evidently not in the case of drugs or prostitution. Then people don't have the right to do what they want with their own bodies. She wants to be tough on some crimes, yet she's defending dirty prosecutors. I've also heard before, and you mentioned how she sticks up for dirty cops, and specifically you mentioned cops who were engaging in sexual misconduct. Now, is this documented? Is there proof of this? And if so, what is it? Or is it just that that's the word that comes out of these institutions?
So what happened was at the time when she was Attorney General of California, so she went after Backpage, which is was an online classified ads website, kind of like Craigslist. People can advertise for all sorts of things: couches, cars, jobs. And there was also a pretty robust adult ads sections where people were advertising for sex work, many of which most forms of sex work that were being advertised there are nominally legal, things like sensual massage, strippers, whatever. Also, people argue and say some of these ads are for prostitution and they're just thinly veiled. But again, nobody knows that. Nobody knows that unless you actually meet up with a person from the ad. So Backpage was running a legal business. Kamala Harris went after them intensely. She brought pimping charges against them twice. They were thrown out of court the first time, and she brought basically the same exact charges the second time, so that she could get her name in the press as taking down sex traffickers is what she called them. Even though I won't get into all that. This is one of my pet subjects here, but at the same time as this is happening, so she's making this big show of stopping sexual exploitation by going after Backpage. She is ignoring and this whole thing that is taking place in the Bay Area, where it started with one cop who was sleeping with an underage girl who was engaging in sex work, and then allegedly all these other cops and were also sort of having sexual relations with this young girl and taking advantage of her. They would there is definitely documented evidence of some of it. One of the original cops she was with killed himself, and then there is documented evidence of some of these other cops like trying to hide this fact that he was having this relationship with this young girl. It ultimately, this is going back years now, so I'm trying to remember exactly what happened, but definitely there were some criminal charges against some of the cops involved in this. But they were having a hard time sort of getting people to investigate, because the same people that were investigating were the ones who were in these police departments that were the colleagues of these cops who were accused of all this sexual misconduct. And there was a lot of pleas for the Attorney General's office to please step in and do its own investigation, because the girl's parents and other people, or mother and other people involved in this case, thought like the only way we're actually going to get justice here is if we get an independent party to actually interrogate what's going on in these police departments. And Harris's office just never responded and just totally declined to do that. So it wasn't exactly that she was sticking up for him, but it was the fact that here is actual documented sexual misconduct going on, committed by police officers, and the Attorney General's office does nothing. And meanwhile, they want to take down a website that sex workers say is helping to keep them more safe, just because it's a flashier thing to do.
You talk about too that she has sort of, I don't know if I'm going to use the right word here, but the sentiment is accurate, that she has a lust for power. There's a sentiment in her that wants to have power. I have no problem believing that, but that seems to be true of probably 99% of politicians. Does she seem to have that to a stronger degree, where she wants to be an authoritarian type of, I don't want to use the word leader, type of elected official or president?
That's a good point. That I obviously, most people who are going to become national politicians, or even most politicians in general, have some sort of lust for power, especially when you get to the higher up levels of them. So I don't necessarily think I'd say that she has that to more of a degree than maybe your average person seeking these sorts of offices. I think it's more weird because, like we've said, she doesn't really have a political core. So there's a lot of people where you can say okay, clearly they want to be in charge, but they want to be in charge because they have this very strong ideology that they think is going to be best for other people, and they want to get that enacted. So it's a lust for power, but there's also sort of an altruistic underpinning to it that you can see. You can see that why they maybe want to do this, because they think that they have the best ideas. But because she doesn't seem to have any particular political ideology or core, that other than whatever is most popular with the Democratic establishment at the time, it just seems, I guess it seems like there's not a lot behind her lust for power, right? There's not this, it doesn't seem like there's a deeper motivation there that is really like, I'm going to go there and help all these people, I'm going to get these new ideas. It's sort of just like, I want to be in power.
So power for the sake of power,
Yeah,
in
I
other
think,
words.
yes, exactly.
So she was in the Senate. I don't know for how long. Do you know how long she was in the Senate for, by any chance?
Uh, she got elected in 2016.
Oh, okay. So she didn't even serve out a full term in the Senate.
No,
Is
no.
there anything about her time in the Senate that distinguishes her or would give us any hint as to what she would do if she were president?
I think she's just mostly a pretty standard Democrat, perhaps slightly to the left of there's evidence that she voted more for sort of economically left policies slightly more often than some of her colleagues. So I think that I think that we've seen both there and in some of the things she's been saying since becoming the nominee or since Biden dropped out, that she's kind of planning on doing more of what Biden has done, except even more extreme in terms of sort of big government programs and government spending.
She also, in I think 2020, was bailing out or had a fund to bail out rioters. Do you know anything about that? Somebody
I
sent it to me this morning. I
don't
vaguely remember hearing about it when it occurred, but I don't know much about it.
No, I'll have to look into this. I don't know.
I believe it was the Minnesota rioters after the George Floyd thing.
Well, that gets at a thing though, which is the funny that is like again, like she was not a radical leftist prosecutor by any means, but because she was running for president in 2020 when we were in this big criminal justice reform movement, she paid a lot of lip service to that, right? So she made herself sound much more radical than she was because I think she thought that's what would appeal to 2020
Sure.
voters. So now it's like she's getting hit from both ends because you have these people who are actually looking at her record and are like, hey, you were sort of a dirty prosecutor, sort of, or at least stuck up for them. This is bad. And then you have other people that are like, hey, you talked about, basically defund the police light. You're this radical liberal who doesn't want to do any law and order stuff. And people can hit her from both sides because she has tried to appeal to both sides on that and sort of not again because she's sort of flip-flop back and forth. It's sort of opened her up to these critiques from both sides of the law and order spectrum.
Yeah. Now, as vice president, Biden famously put her in charge or tasked her with handling the crisis at the border. Now, I don't know what a vice president could possibly do to handle the crisis at the border, but it doesn't seem like she can claim that because she accepted it when Biden said it. She accepted it as legitimate, as did he. How much of a liability do you think that is for her?
I think
That
it's
the border crisis
I think
or
it's
what
going
they
to be a
call a
big
crisis.
liability, mostly because Republicans are definitely going to just have been and are going to continue to hammer that home and make it appear as if the border crisis is sort of her fault or got worse under her watch. I don't think that's a fair critique because, like you said, she couldn't really do much about it. Definitely not on her own or anything. So I think that it's something of an unfair critique to say that it's her fault. But I think that nonetheless, it's going to be a critique that is going to resonate with people and it will be a liability for her. And just to say, though, I mean, even though I don't think she could have, solved the border crisis or anything like that on her own, I do think that she didn't handle the position in the best way possible because even though she couldn't do certain things there is a role she could have played, right? She could have been played more of a rhetorical role in shaping the debate here. She could have been rallying Democrats in certain ways, legislators, people who could do things about it, and I don't really think she did much of anything. So
That's true. And while I do think it's a bit unfair to blame her, I have no sympathy. It reminds me of the presidents who, have very little control over the economy, but they want to take credit when things go well. Then you have to accept blame when things go bad. That just seems to me that's just the way it goes. What would you expect from a Harris administration if she gets into office? What can we look for?
so on the one level this is kind of hard because again it's like who knows because like which president Harris would we be getting she's gone through so many different iterations in her career about who she is and what she believes that it's a little hard, I think. But if she does have a political core, it's like as I've said, sort of just being what the Democrats in the moment want. So I think we can sort of expect basically what we've been getting from Biden, except she seems to maybe be even willing to be less moderate on economic issues than he is. So I think we, be looking at more of the same or a little bit more extreme sort of spending on big government programs than even he was supporting.
Yeah, I wonder how much of a position Trump and Vance are to exploit the weaknesses of Kamala, right? I mean, yes, she's dishonest. She flip-flops. She's for the big government. She didn't handle COVID well, or at least the administration didn't handle COVID well. But all these criticisms, it seems, apply equally to Trump.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean, it's
like, how strong of a position is he to exploit her weaknesses?
it's funny because yeah, he obviously is in no position to be able to criticize anyone for flip flopping or then again, though, he will do that because he's sort of shameless, like
Yeah.
your ordinary politician is like, okay, like I've got this sort of a liability too. I just won't bring it up on others. But you'll be like, when Trump is called out on like, you said this one day and you're saying another thing this week, it's just like, I never said that. Like he's just so bold that it's kind of funny. He gets away with criticizing things in other people that he should be, feeling shame for himself, but he just totally doesn't. Um, there's so much they could hit her with. And like, I mentioned the truancy thing earlier, and my husband, who is also a political journalist, and I were just talking about how like it's sort of shocking that Trump hasn't hit on that yet, because that feels like the kind of thing that your average normie independent moderate voter would hear like, oh, like she went on a real crusade to lock up parents for their children being skipping school too many times or something like that. People are not going to like that. Like that seems like one of the things that you could hit her on. And instead, Trump is doing this weird, like she's not really black, she's Indian, which
Yeah.
is just so it's like, yeah, it's like you got a lot you could work with, like that is legitimate to criticize Harris about, and instead they're going off on this like weird sort of stuff that I think that they're extremely online based likes, and so it seems like maybe the Trump campaign is making a mistake of sort of hitting her too much based on things that like the online Twitter or Truth Social crowd cares about and not things that like your average voter might actually care about.
Women in minorities really seem to bring out the worst in Trump. Like there's some, not to psychoanalyze him too much, but there seems to be something deep within him that just does not respond well to that, whether it's the Obama birth certificate or calling, talking about Carly Fiorina's face or the nasty woman stuff, calling women, all kinds of names. It just seems like it's his Achilles heel. And because of that, I wouldn't bet on it, but if I had to, I would say he's going to lose. I just, he can't seem to help himself.
I mean, yeah, him and I would not say that he's going to lose. I really don't know. I thought for sure he was going to win if Biden was,
Sure.
and now I'm not so sure. But I do think that they are just gonna, especially with Vance too as his running mate, like they're just gonna keep stepping in it and again with the things that they say about Harris, and they're gonna do it in a way that, yeah, that alienates women voters and alienates people of color and maybe some people who aren't necessarily sold on her because But when you have someone who's criticizing her in such a racist or a sexist or a gendered or way, I think that definitely does make people rally around her more. It's so weird. So just to go back, it's so weird the thing that he's doing with the biracial stuff. It's just like, do you think that people don't understand how being biracial works? Like,
Yeah.
even your dumbest like person out there, like the people get that you can be like two different races at
Yeah.
once. Like, it's so weird that he's just going around pretending that's not a thing and like that's going to be an effective line of attack.
It's absolutely bizarre. Now, Biden, obviously, he's, I don't know, I don't want to say obviously, but it seems obvious to me that he's not cognitively with it,
Yeah.
right? And if Kamala has been around him, she must have kept it a secret. Is that going to be a liability for her?
Yeah, we haven't heard too much about that yet from critics either. But I think I'm actually sort of surprised that we haven't because I would think it would be a liability, right? But I don't know. I mean, I guess you can play there. There's always been this talk though that Harris was kept pretty removed from Biden. That even though they were sort of on the surface, this team, that they really did not work together particularly closely or well. So I guess there is a sort of plausible deniability there. I wouldn't actually buy that. I mean, I think no matter how not close they were, she had to have been close enough to see what was going on. But I think maybe they do have at least plausible deniability there.
Something that's, I don't know if it's tangential to this issue, but I found it interesting. I listened to an interview you did on this subject, and it was a man and a woman interviewing you. And the woman seemed to assume that because you were criticizing Kamala, you must be supporting Trump. And that's something that drives me out of my mind. Yeah, and I'm curious your visceral response when that happens, because it's not automatic because I criticize one candidate. I mean, I've been criticized for, being a Fox News fanatic and being a liberal communist. I've been accused of being a pro-Israel shill, of being a Palestinian. I mean, it's all over the place. And I just wonder when that happens in the interview you did, what is your immediate like gut reaction?
It it depends on the day because sometimes it makes me mad and sometimes it just makes me laugh. Like, but because this, like you said, like this is just being a libertarian. Like people kind of sometimes can't conceive of the fact that like someone that's might exist outside of the team red, team blue paradigm. And so, yeah, if you, I get it from both sides. When I criticize the right, I get like, oh, you raging leftist, and when I criticize, the left, I get like, oh, stupid MAGA fan. And it's just funny because one, obviously it's not true. I do criticize both sides. But two, it's like I'm a journalist, especially when people do it to journalists, it's especially weird because it's like, even if I say like I don't support Trump, they'll be like, well, even if you don't support him, like you're helping him win because you're not running interference for Harris or Biden or whoever, essentially. And it's like, that's not my job. Like my job is to report on what people are doing, to report on their records. And there's obviously plenty of people criticizing Trump. So if I ever get the accusation, like, oh, we write more about Harris or whoever than Trump, like, well, because I think, sometimes you need people to do that. You need people to point out her flaws and her, policy positions that are alarming as well. And you have so much of the media that's not going to do that because they are just so focused on Trump. So it's like if I am criticizing her more than Trump, it's just because I think that there's a dearth of that sort of criticism out there. And there's a place for both. We should be clear-eyed about who people are. It doesn't mean I'm not trying to tell people don't vote for Harris, if that's what they're going to do, great. But like, I just want to give people information about who she is so that people aren't, kind of going into this all rosy-eyed and I don't think rosy-eyed is a thing, starry-eyed, um, and thinking that she's this sort of perfect candidate.
You also mentioned in an article. I don't think it was in the main article I read on this, but you talked about this group. What are they called? The Karens for Kamala. Like what the hell is going on?
Well, that's what the actress Connie Britton, jokingly called them, which because she was on this call. There was this white woman for Harris call, and because it started because there was like a black woman for Harris call and then a black man for Harris call, and then so they were like, let's see this white woman for Harris call, which somehow just becomes like so much more cringe. And I tuned into it, and it was just amazing in like all the ways you'd think it would be amazing. Just this like very at once like woo woo, but like also self-flagellating like demeanor of everyone. Like, we're all so privileged. We need to listen to black women and show up for them. And which is like really just sort of patronizing too. This idea that, like it's, the black women are sort of magical and can do no wrong. And so, all black women are good and all white women need to listen to them. There's a way you can say, obviously, that, historically we've not put enough stock in these certain opinions, black women's opinions, things like that. But it isn't like that. It's like this sort of like reverent, patronizing attitude towards black women, and then this very self deprecating idea that white women are all just terrible, and so we need to get out there and like atone for our sins just for being white women. There was like this whole thing about how white women voted for Trump, and so it's only because they care about benefiting from patriarchy and misogyny and racism and white supremacy and things like that. Just this total inability to imagine that some women might just be conservative, right? Like some
Yeah.
women think the conservatives have better economic policies. They might, abortion might be the most important issue to them, any number of things. There's this sort of inability to imagine the fact that women might support conservative candidates for reasons other than like racism or patriarchy or just, being sort of brainwashed.
Yeah.
It was a weird call, especially because
It's
Connie Britton and Pink were
yeah.
on too.
It's to use the word that seems to be going around. It's weird.
It's weird. It's
Yeah,
weird.
it's
Exactly.
weird. I'm seeing that all over the place now. It's the new buzzword, weird. Okay, well, before I let you go, is there anything else that we should have covered about Kamala that I didn't ask about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I'm just really sort of I'm really curious to see how the next, few months before the election are going to go because like I said, like right now, I think people have kind of forgotten how bad she is at campaigning, forgotten how bad she can be as a politician because, you know, she's just sort of been in this superficial role in the vice president. She's sort of like had this like wacky aunt demeanor, you know, she comes in, she says some like weird sort of esoteric stuff, and people are like, well, that's funny, but harmless. And so, you know, and people are excited about her identity. And, you know, I understand why. I understand why people are excited about the possibility of a woman president, the possibility of having, you know, a Black woman president or our first Asian American president. But I think people have let this sort of, you know, excitement about who, about her identity kind of blind them the fact about who she is individually as a person. And, you know, she's not just a Black woman or an Asian woman or, you know, a woman president. She's like, she is the particular person, and who this person is someone who has been a bad candidate and had bad policies. And I think that as she campaigns more, we're going to, you know, see more reminders of
I think we will too. Okay,
that.
where can people find you?
Reason.com. I write on there all sorts of things, but I also write the Sex and Tech newsletter. So if you go to our newsletters page, you can subscribe there. And I'm on X at En Brown.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For now, this is the Rational Egoist signing out. I'm Michael Liebowitz. Till next time.